Protocol requires that I read this. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activity so as to prevent their desertification. Ms. Pearman, give a roll call, please.
Mr. O'Brien?
Here.
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Apperson? We have a quorum.
Thank you. Questions with the minutes? Approval, disapproval? Are they okay?
Minutes look fine to me.
Mr. Waltrip, everything okay? Good. Minutes stand approved as read. The way we'll manage the public hearings tonight, outlined for tonight's public hearing, will be a staff presentation followed by questions or clarifications from the board. And then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anyone wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. After everyone who wishes to speak have done so, the public hearing will be closed and discussion among the board will start. I'd like to start off tonight with asking Mr. Wilson for case number WJPA 21-0019, John Tyler Pier.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson here, Senior Section Chief for Resource Protection, here to present case WJPA 21-0019, 1497 John Tyler Highway. Ms. Carla Havens of Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting has applied for a wetlands permit on behalf of Mr. Christopher Cook to construct a pier on property located at 1497 John Tyler Highway within the Gordon Creek watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map Parcel 34303-00006. The applicant is proposing to construct a 5-foot by 500-foot pier with an L-shaped platform and boat lift. Existing conditions of the property include a tidal bald cypress marsh, which the applicant proposes to cross in order to construct the pier. The proposed construction is anticipated to traverse approximately 700 square feet of vegetated wetlands. The applicant has expressed that the construction will occur from both the uplands and the water, and that no tree clearing will take place, and the decking shall be no less than 4 feet above the wetland substrate. There was no information regarding the construction methods of the pier, other than that it would occur from both the water and from the uplands. Staff has concerns, or had concerns, with the construction access through the vegetated portion of the wetland system for this project. After talking with the contractor for the project, it will be constructed using the same methods and means as a similar pier in Uncle's Neck. It is not the impacts associated with the pier itself that the board is reviewing, but the construction method which is being permitted by the board through the vegetated wetlands. As published in the Virginia Register on July 11, 2005, the revised Wetland Mitigation Compensation Policy and Supplemental Guidelines, Regulation 4 VAC 20-390-10 et seq. As a Chesapeake Bay program partner, Virginia is committed to achieve a no net loss of existing wetland acreage and function in the regulatory programs. In order for a project to be authorized to impact wetlands and to compensate for the wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following 3 criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated into the proposal. The proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature, and the proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. If the proposed project cannot meet one or more of the above criteria, the project must be denied or must occur in areas outside of wetlands. Should it satisfy all 3 criteria, however, compensation for the wetlands loss is required. The sequence of acceptable mitigation options should be as followed: on-site, off-site within the same watershed, mitigation banks in the same watershed, or a payment in lieu of fee. If compensation is required, it should be a condition of the permit. Staff has reviewed this application and finds that the application meets the 3 criteria outlined above. It is anticipated that approximately 700 square feet of vegetated impacts may be impacted during the construction of this project. Should that occur, the owner shall replant the impacted area or may purchase credits from an approved tidal wetlands mitigation bank. Staff's reviewed the application and recommends approval of the application as presented. Should the board wish to approve the application, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into that approval. That the applicant obtain any other necessary local, federal, state permits as required for the project. This does include a building safety permits, building permit. All development activities located within the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. That a meeting shall take place prior to the start of construction to assess and review the construction methods of the proposed pier. Staff may invite representatives of the regulatory agencies along with the Wetlands Board, the applicant, agent, contractor to this meeting. A meeting shall take place no later than 1 year after construction to determine the extent of wetland impacts, if any. Staff may invite representatives of those same agencies as the pre-construction meeting. It will be determined at this meeting if wetland impacts occurred. If there are permanent wetland impacts, the applicant shall purchase from an approved tidal wetlands mitigation bank an equal number of square feet to offset those impacts, or they could replant the impacted area. The wetlands permit for this project shall expire June 9th, 2024 if construction is not begun, and that if an extension of the permit is needed, a written request shall be provided to our office no later than April 28th, 2024, 6 weeks prior to that expiration. If I may direct your attention to your screens in front of you, I would like to walk you through a brief presentation. Again, this is WJPA 21-0019 at 1497 John Tyler Highway for Mr. Christopher Cook, and it is a pier. Subject parcel is in Barrett's Ferry Landing at the end or across the street from Chickahominy Riverfront Park in this area, right before one traverses the bridge across the Chickahominy River and heads on into Charles City County. Close up from the aerial map, you can see the forested area here. This is where the pier will be constructed across. Topography from the GIS provided by the county shows that this is elevation 4, this is elevation 4, this is elevation 2, and then as you go up onto the properties, elevation 6 and 8. Floodplain elevation in this area is elevation 7, and it is also elevation 8, and that is shown in this map right here in blue. From the application, the site plan provided, the area in green is the vegetated wetland portion of the property. The area in yellow is the extent of the pier. 150 feet of it traversing the vegetated portion of the property, and then 350 feet traversing open water to get to deep water for the boathouse and boat lift at the end of the pier. Some photographs from the site, standing in the uplands, looking through the vegetation. This one holly tree would need to be removed. This damaged tree here would need to be removed, and then the pier would go across the vegetated part here. These trees are all bald cypress, and the area does have the characteristic bald cypress knees all throughout it. From the water, or from the middle of the project, looking at a side view of the pier would be going through this way. And as we get closer to the end of the pier, there is a slight berm where the river has dumped sand over time and provided a natural levee. The sandy part here would be traversed as well, no grading proposed, and the pier would go out into the water that way. Standing on that berm and looking back into the project, you can see the vegetation community. As mentioned in the staff report, there was a similar project located in Uncle's Neck. It was Mr. Sean Lemon's property at 7596 Uncle's Neck. That case did come before the board for the same issues. He constructed a pier through a cypress swamp. And Mr. Wilbur Jordan of Jordan Marine, who will be building this pier, also built that pier. And I just briefly wanted to go through this, showing you what Mr. Jordan had done on that property. Mr. Jordan is in the audience tonight, and would request that he explain to the board his construction methods for this pier, because I am not technologically advanced enough to do that, other than to say that he had no wetland impacts on this project here in Uncle's Neck. So from the uplands, looking at the pier, you can see the bald cypress knees and some peltandra and some sedges and rushes along the pier location here. Standing on the pier, looking at the side, one side of it, and then here we can actually we got a little bit of the pier in this picture for better clarification. There were no impacts to the adjacent wetlands when this pier was built. And then a little bit further down the pier, out to the boat lift, and then standing on the boat lift, looking back towards the house. If you notice on either side of this pier, there are no apparent wetland impacts. So, should the board wish to approve this permit application, and staff does recommend that you do so, with the following conditions: that the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, local, and state permits as required for the project. This does include a building permit issued by Building Safety and Permits. That all development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance, and receive all the required approval and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. That a meeting take place prior to work, a pre-construction meeting to discuss the construction method and photo document further the wetland system, and then post-construction that a meeting take place and photo documentation provided by staff to determine that if there were any wetland impacts from the construction. And if there are wetland impacts, the applicant would have to either pay an in lieu fee to a wetland mitigation bank or replant on site. That the permit for this project shall expire in 3 years, June 9th, 2024, if construction is not begun, and that an extension is needed for this, that it be submitted to our office no later than 6 weeks prior to that expiration date, April 28th, 2024. And that is the extent of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding this application.
I have a couple questions. So the construction method will be similar to what was done at Uncle's Neck. How long was that pier at Uncle's Neck? I can't remember. I remember voting for it, but,
It was not 500 feet long, but the part through the cypress swamp was roughly 150 feet as well.
that was 50 feet.
It's similar to the vegetated length on this pier. That is correct.
But then after that, that was a much shorter pier.
Yes, the Chickahominy River in that location drops off significantly, a lot closer to the shore as opposed to the situation here on the James River at the confluence of the Chickahominy. And Ms. Carla Havens is here as well. She can address the length of the pier
Um,
if that's
Okay. I have not been out to the site, so I haven't seen it. I have to go by what you're showing me tonight in the photos. This, in like the overhead, it looked like it was very forested, up to the marsh. Are there going to be any impacts to the RPA in constructing this, or how are they getting to the start of this pier? Is there going to be a path built, or
there
a
will
road,
be
or what?
there'll be a path that would be allowed administratively to the pier from the house, and that's standard operating procedure to allow access to the pier through the RPA.
But there won't be any clearing in the RPA?
No, we would work with the applicant to make sure that no mature trees were cut down in the placement of that path. It could be worked through and around existing vegetation.
Is this going to cover any cypress knees or have any impacts on the existing trees there?
The goal, since the pier is elevated 4 feet above the wetlands, is to not impact any cypress knees. It does state in the application that no cypress knees will be removed in the placement of the piles. So I would address that, or I would let Mr. Wilbur Jordan address those concerns on how he would deal with a cypress knee that's in the path.
So it's 4 feet above the top of all the vegetation, right?
From the ground elevation.
It's 4
4 feet above ground elevation, not above the vegetation.
So is the it won't have a shading effect on the vegetation under it? I mean, it's a really tight pier.
It has been accounted for in the width of the pier. Again, I would let Miss Carla Havens address that.
So the same contractor is going to be
Who built the
who built
Lemons
the one in
Pier
Uncle's Neck.
will build
We'll
this
do
pier.
this one.
That is
and
correct.
we'll hear a little bit more about that shortly.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And okay, go ahead.
And I want to make sure I understand it. So we're specifying, we can't determine now the wetlands impacts. We got to wait till after construction to see if there are any impacts.
Correct.
And at that time, you'll have a meeting and the staff will make a determination whether you've impacted the wetlands, and what would the mitigation be?
It would be on a per square foot basis, and they would have to replant on site as the first option, and if they could not do that, then they would have to buy credits on a per square foot basis from an approved tidal wetlands bank.
And do we have some in that area? Or?
We do. We have one tidal wetlands bank that covers James City County on the York River, or I'm sorry, on the James River.
Walter?
So,
Right.
yeah, are there piers in adjacent properties?
Not yet. This property was recently subdivided into, I believe, either 5 or 7 properties, smaller properties, 2 to 3 acres in size.
This is
so
the first one?
The first one in this section. There are, in the adjacent section, there are, in Barrett's Ferry proper, there are some piers. And
But the two
think-
adjacent
But
plats?
not in Barrett's Ferry Landing. I think they'll show up. It's it's too small, but Barrett's Ferry Landing are these lots here, and then Barrett's Ferry itself are these lots here. And I do believe that there are some piers in Barrett's Ferry proper.
What's the requirement of, who do we notify about this project in writing? Is it just the adjacent property owners, or is it anybody else?
The adjacent property owners are notified. The VMRC and the other regulatory agencies are notified.
Just the two adjacent?
Just the two adjacent.
I noticed in the board book, one had responded, but I didn't see that a letter from the other property owner that saying I didn't see any response from the other property owner.
Right.
Did they receive the letter, or have we contacted them?
We contacted them via the mail, snail mail, and we did not receive a letter back saying it was undeliverable. Ms. Havens, as part of her application process, also notifies those adjacent property owners. And if she has failed to do that, then the VMRC would notify them as part of their review.
Okay.
So they will be notified.
I'm sort of concerned, this is a very expensive property next door, all lots here are a lot of money, and, and you said it was recently subdivided. I want to make sure we're notifying the people, living next door. This pier would have a major impact on, on them. And,
I am confident they were notified.
Well, it'd be nice to, also try to pick up the phone and call them, just in case the address has changed or something. Okay,
You're welcome.
that's it for me.
Brian, anything else? Oh, Mr. Wilson, I'd like to ask you something. I was thinking about this since the last meeting before last, brought this up. The concern that the board, I imagine, and I have on the possibility of invasive species being established. There's probably too much shade here for Phragmites to become established, but I would like to ask you and the board to consider putting this in as a standard paragraph in the permit that invasive species will also be considered degradation of wetlands and must be removed or accounted for depending on your inspection after enough time has taken place for this to either happen or not happen. I do not want to see Phragmites become established anywhere where it can be prevented easily, and it can be prevented easily now, as you are aware, sir. With a pier project like this, while it's small, and there's other species that you could also be on guard for invading the disturbed site. There's so much shade there; it's probably going to be safe. But I'd like to ask you to do that if you would.
Absolutely, we will monitor that. Would you want to make that a condition?
Up to the board. If the board wants to, it's okay with me. If we need a motion from someone to do that.
Yeah, when we're prepared to make a motion, I would like, one of us to make a motion to include,
I don't
Phragmites is a serious issue.
Yeah, I don't see that as, in this particular case, to be
I don't either, sir.
an issue.
I don't either.
But
I just want to bring it to the board's attention, and we talked about this before, and especially Powhatan Creek, I do not want to see it become established anywhere where it could be prevented easily, is where I'm coming
Agreed.
from.
it is very difficult to eradicate once it's established.
If you want a motion, I'm sure someone from the board here would make it. I will if they don't want to. Want to make that motion?
It is apparent that those waterfront lots along there, based on the proximity of the depth leading up to the shoreline, that you're gonna see a lot of long piers come out there. People that, I would assume, the people that have bought those lots there bought it because they were on the water, near the water. Have an idea, you're gonna see a lot of long piers come out there. So, something that we're gonna be looking forward to.
Thank you, Mr. Waltrip. Make this motion a little bit later after we finish talking to the
Yeah,
staff.
let's open after the public hearing.
Everybody's finished. At this time, we'd like to thank you, Mr. Wilson, for his presentation, and we'll open this public hearing up. Anyone wishing to speak to this project, please come forward. Ms. Havens, Hello.
I'm Carla Havens, Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting, 1095 Cherry Row Lane, Plainview, Virginia, 23156. And thank you for the thorough presentation and supporting the project. I think it's a really good project. To give you a little history, there are 7 parcels that were subdivided out of the old farm that was there. If you look at the aerials, the farmhouse, and some outbuildings and sheds show up. They are no longer there. It is a historic site. I've spoken with the Virginia Historic Resources people, and the Corps of Engineers is working with them on a review for the Cook project. Of the 7 parcels, Mr. Cook's and the parcel to his left as you're facing the river, those are the only ones I'm aware of that have a forested portion to them or a forested wetland portion to them. The parcels to the right, it's all eroded away or else it was agricultural. So that's why you haven't seen those 2 projects come before you, because we're not going through any significant wetlands like the Cook project is. With regards to the conditions, including that of frag eradication, I don't think Mr. Cook or Mrs. Cook will have a problem with that. Some deal with the contractor. Wilbur Jordan is here this evening to address your questions when I'm finished here. The 4-foot decking above the wetland substrate is a standard Corps of Engineer requirement. The wetland substrate is where the plants emerge out of, whether it's peat, sand, muck, mud, but that's where the measurement is taken from, where the plants emerge out of the wetland substrate. Access to the site, to the landward edge of the pier, they're going to be using the existing driveway that's in there now, the gravel driveway. It starts up at John Tyler Highway and basically goes straight to the house. Then there's going to be decking around the back, to a concrete decking around the back to a pool. From the pool back to the start of the pier, it's a straight shot. And the Corps of Engineers was concerned about that as well. And they requested a detail that I know if I give it to you. So, rear of the house to the starting point of the pier. Both APOs, adjacent property owners, have signed off on the application.
So the,
APOs both signed off.
okay.
And I thought they
Yeah,
were
that
both.
wasn't in our board books. Yeah.
Okay, the Mr. Buzzanel's came in late, but it's right there for you. I think that was all of your questions. The meetings before and after, I think, are a great idea. I think 3 years should be fine. The Corps of Engineers is putting some restrictions on this based on anadromous fish, the sturgeon. This is a bald eagle concentration area, so we're working with the Corps of Engineers to make sure that we're not upsetting the eagles. Worst case, there'll be a time of year restriction, which is basically December 15th through March 15th, when the eagles are mating and rearing their young. So I told Mr. Cook, you're going to get a pier, it just may be a while, and you may have a couple windows that you're going to have to work within. Again, the contractor, Wilbur Jordan, is here with Jordan Marine Construction. Additionally, Mr. Cook and Mrs. Cook were not able to attend, but Mrs. Cook's father is here in case you have questions about the project site that I can't answer.
May I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if I'm embarrassed to say this, but I remember the last time I went out to Barrett's Ferry is when we approved the original plan for Barrett's Ferry. I remember doing a site visit. And how long ago was that, Mr. Wilson?
That, Mr. Gussman, that predated me.
Oh, okay. That was the last time I was on site, was the original approval of the subdivision. I haven't been there since. Now, you're talking about 7 parcels are subdivided. I wasn't aware, is this a recent subdivision of the existing property? What was approved by the board, probably 15, 20 years ago?
Mr. Gussman,
Yes.
it was a recent subdivision within the last 5 years.
Oh, okay. So within the last 5 years, there was a recent subdivision. Okay. Now, you made a couple references. I had a little trouble following you about the Corps of Engineers is reviewing the project, and the Corps of Engineers has some concerns, et cetera. Can you explain to me what this review is? I'm sort of blindsided by
Sure.
that.
I work 15 counties. I prepare and present in almost all of them because not all of them have wetlands boards. You are the only county who exerts jurisdiction over non-commercial open pile piers.
Okay.
And that's why you don't have a thorough, complete understanding, most likely, of their process. So, and I understand that what you are approving this evening is the construction method of the pier. You're not approving the pier. So that method, as Mike explained, if it impacts wetlands, but by that construction, that's how you have authority. I don't quite understand it. I don't know how you got that authority. No other board that I know of does that. But normally, non-commercial open pile piers, all piers are reviewed at VMRC and the Corps of Engineers. And quite often, if your pier conforms to certain specifications, such as no more than 2 boat lifts, no more than 400 square feet of decking, no more than 700 square feet of open-sided boathouse, you're going to get a regional permit, which you're just going to basically get a simple stamped permit from the Corps of Engineers.
General permit, is it?
Well, it's a regional permit. It's
Okay.
not a general permit. General permit's a little different. That's when you can't conform to the regional permit conditions. Well, in addition to that, places like James City County, Charles City County, they have a lot of history to them. The Corps of Engineers they're not like PEs, but they're called engineers. They're the people that review the permits. They pull up these, they'll go to the historic resource site, and you and I can go and look at it as public, John Q. Public, and we can see information such as the historic farmhouse that dates to the 1800s and their Indian relics scattered all over the place too. But the Corps has access to much greater information in it, and they come up in what's called a polygon. And that whole Hoffmeyer 7 parcels there is a polygon. So there's a lot of stuff there. So the Corps then scrutinizes, well, what are those things that are there? And so the historic resources is 1. They got a hit for bald eagles, so that's 2. And then the Chickahominy sometimes has time of year restrictions on it for the sturgeon that migrate up and down. And the whole idea is that when you're pounding piles in to build your pier out in the water, the reverberations that go through the water and into the sediments, and they don't want to upset the fish as they're migrating back and forth. So it's up to the Corps to work with NOAA, with Department of Historic Resources, with Department of Game and Inland Fisheries and Fisheries and Wildlife over these items. So unless you follow all of that from the Corps, you're not going to know that that's going on. But the Corps is very good at letting the property owners know of these things that, that are out there and that might impact their project.
Thank you for explaining that to me, because I was not aware of that. Does the Corps allow any public participation? Is there any public notice? Do they produce, I know it wouldn't be a recorded decision, but, you know, do they produce a document for the public to
Not
comment on?
normally. There's so many piers going in. If both adjacent property owners sign off, they're happy with that. The Corps will make most commonly, it's been my experience, they just make the time of year restrictions. As a waterfront property owner, you have the legal right to gain access to navigable water. And again, there are conditions that go with that. Like you can't go more than 1/4 the distance of well, you can go more than 1/4 the distance of the waterway. You need to justify it, and that's when you get the regional permit instead of a general permit instead of a regional permit. So it's a very complicated system. But the whole idea is that John Q. Public can apply and get a permit in a very simple manner. It's just nobody else views it other than the Corps. But they run it through other agencies for things like rare, threatened, and
But is
endangered species.
there any chance for public comment on that?
Not to my knowledge,
They
unless
don't-
you're like Virginia Power, you know, putting in a new, they do have public hearings, but it's for big projects or,
But there wouldn't be a public hearing, or is
Not for
could-
something like
if the-
this.
If somebody objected to this, could they request a public hearing for this?
they would
from-
go to VMRC.
They would have to request it through the VMRC, not through the Corps, though.
Right. So if either one of these APOs,
I'm sorry, what's an APO?
adjacent property owners,
Oh,
objected to the Cook's Pier, VMRC would try, and I would try to get things worked out, whatever it is they're objecting to. And you know, sometimes people, well, their cat walks across my car, my $60,000 car, and leaves their footprints all over it. Well, that's got nothing to do with this project. So we try to get everything smooth and worked out, you know, whether it's shifting things or, you know, clearing up viewscapes. I mean, people pay a lot of money for that view, and they don't necessarily want to watch or look at somebody else's boathouse. So if it cannot be worked out, then VMRC puts it on their agenda and hears it and listens to the objection and determines if it's valid or not.
well, I'm asking you these questions because I know what we're going to decide on tonight is very limited in scope, but I'm just wondering, you mentioned the view, you know, the adjacent, you know, property owners may not want to see that. I mean, there's a really big boathouse at the end of it. And next door neighbors may not want to look at it, and they've been notified. But, you know, I went biking on the Capitol Landing Trail, you know. I do that almost a lot of weekends. And there's an awful lot of public, you know, going out there looking at the beautiful view of the mouth of the Chickahominy. And what about the public that's looking out at that? What if they have an objection and they feel that having a 500-foot pier and a big boathouse at the end of it, if they object to that, how would they you know, voice their objections? They're not the adjacent property owners, but other people might feel that's destroying the view from the bridge. I mean, this is right in the mouth of the Chickahominy.
Yeah, tonight is
I
an
know tonight
opportunity.
we're looking at,
for
but
the
since
public.
you're explaining to me about the Corps, you know, how the Corps process works, and I'm just asking you, would the public have a chance to comment on those issues with the Corps, or?
I'm not aware of that. They may be able to, but I don't know how they would access, I don't know how John Q. Public would access knowing that somebody was putting in a pier. I mean, waterfront property owners, as long as you own a mean little water, correct me if I'm wrong, you have the right to gain access with one pier. So,
Yeah.
and none, I mean, there are always exceptions, but it's complicated. That's why people hire me, because they don't want to be busy with it.
All right, thank you for answering my questions.
Okay, and Mr. Jordan's here if you'd like to speak with him.
Questions? Anyone else wish to speak? Yes, sir.
Wilbur Jordan, from Jordan Marine, the owner of it, and I live here in Williamsburg. And like I said, the way we're gonna be constructing it, the same way we did the one in Uncle's Neck, is I had these little piers, and they're just big enough to drive an excavator on. There's two of them, and I'll drive my machine on one of them and reach around, swing the other one in front of me, and just keep crawling across the marsh. And the only impact I'm doing is basically the width of the pier, because I'll go all the way to the other side and build it as I come back, so I'm just going over, coming back in the path of where the pier's at. The only damage is, it's really not a damage, but there's 4 poles where the bridge is, when it sits on the marsh for my machine to drive on, so it's not like I'm tearing a bunch of stuff up.
You can only work on high tide, or?
Well, if it's a nor'easter and the tide's way up in the marsh, it gets over top of my bridge, no, I can't work. I can't do it then. But other than that, yeah, I can work pretty much any tide.
You can work on low tides,
Right.
minus tides and stuff, and.
Right, yeah.
Wait, are you in the water, or are you floating on the water, or you're just?
It's actually, it's like a little bridge that you drive your machine on. And then, like I say, I'll pick the other smaller bridge up behind me, swing it around in front of me, then I'll crawl on that one, and I just keep crawling out with the 2 bridges.
And how do you bring the bridges into the property?
I'll just bring them in on a trailer.
You bring them in landward?
Right.
You plop it down, and then you swing out the next one?
And just crawl on across the marsh. And then once I get across the marsh, everything else will come in by water, so it won't be any impact at all from there.
Thank you.
Latest technology has helped the contractor to do jobs that does not impact the wetlands like they used to. Used to, you'd have to build out on a barge or mats to do this, and then you destroy the wetlands. Now they build the bridges, the flyovers from above, and they never touch the ground until they put them in. So they've come a long ways. I commend the way you do it now. It sure saves the wetlands.
Thanks.
So you did the one at Uncle's Neck? That's actually 2 lots down from me. So I've been on that pier, and I have to say it was a really, really well done job. So it's encouraging to know that you're the contractor that's being proposed for this particular site, because what you did there, to my knowledge, didn't have any impact. Now, when you were done with that job at Uncle's Neck, did you have to do any rework or any mitigation?
By the time that job was done, it already pretty much started going back. You know, so we didn't have to do anything. Like I say, it was just so minimal impact on there. It all come back by itself. And I've learned in the past, the more I tear up, the more I have to fix at the end. So I try not to tear up so much.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak, please? Please come forward. Seeing no one wishing to speak, we will close the public hearing and discussion by the board.
I have a couple comments.
Please.
Okay. It sounds like the technology is really good for doing this. But I still have some concerns about this and about this project. As I said earlier, last time I was out there was 15 or 20 years ago. I haven't been out there since. I just got the information about this last night, and I read through it, and I saw a few photos, but for a project like this that could have a major impact, I'd like to go out on the site. You know, a lot of times board members, we do site visits, and because we received this information so late, and the information in our board book was very incomplete. We've got, you know, new information submitted, which I can't just look at this and digest it. I'm sort of a slow learner. I got to take my time and look at it. I would really like to either go out alone, go out with staff and meet the consultant on site and have it explained to me on how it's going to work, and see see exactly where the pier is going to go. One of the things is we want to minimize the impacts. And if I don't go out on site, I can't tell, is this the best line, through the marsh? Maybe there's a better spot that has less impacts. We'll cover fewer bald cypress knees and would just have less environmental impacts. And I can't, from looking at three photos, I can't make that call. So I would request that the applicant, we can't, delay the application, but I would request that the applicant ask for a delay for another month and meet any board members that are interested in going out on site.
I see.
Sure.
How would you feel about this? Have the opinion of the other two board members before the official request is made to wait a month. I would like to have the opinion here. I have no problem with the project myself. I don't have any problem with waiting either to take a look at it. But I'd like to have the consensus of the board before we approach the landowner there and ask them to defer for a month. If that's
Sure,
okay with you.
absolutely.
Mr. Waltrip or Mr. O'Brien, for you?
I personally have looked at it myself, and I really, looking at the pictures, I really see no problem with the way that it's designed and how it's put in or anything about it personally. I don't think it could be done any better than what I see the application. That's my own opinion.
Yeah, I mean, like David, I came into the meeting having a lot of apprehension and concern about the construction of the pier and how they were going to mitigate and any damage to the wetlands and things like that. But I think I have to say that the presentation by Ms. Haven and Mr. Wilbur Jordan at least gives me some assurance that this is going to be done correctly. Particularly in light of the fact that I've actually visited the site that you did most recently, 3 years ago, and like I said, it was well done. So if you're employing the same techniques, which you say you are, then I have a lot of confidence that that's going to be something that can be worked out for this property. It looks very similar in terms of 150 feet of navigating across the wetlands. So like I said, I was apprehensive, but David, I feel like there's pretty good explanation here, but if there's a willingness to delay it in order to get some of the board's concerns addressed, I would support that.
Thank you. My position on this would be that I also think that, based on what I've seen here, that the project is engineered to the 10th degree, and I've seen the work that Mr. Jordan has done. At the same time, I respect Mr. Gussman's apprehensions and wanting to be as thorough as possible, and I respect a board member's opinion. The trees there, the cypress trees, will live for 1,000 years. And I would like to say that I would think that it would meet everyone's approval if we could just wait one more month to take a look at it. I don't think I have any problem at all with the project passing based on what I have heard here. But at the same time, I respect any member's decision to just wait one more month to take a look at it. At the same time, I respect Mr. Jordan's position, and I know you're working for a living. And I know the folks there have underneath a time restraint because of the environmental activities going on around there. But I would support Mr. Gussman's request if we could just take one look at this for one afternoon. If it meets Mr. Wilson's approval, the staff's approval, I'm not exactly sure how we should proceed with this legally, but I'll take advice from Ms. Pierman on what should we do next.
Yeah,
Do we
thank
have
you,
to have a
Mr.
vote to excuse me, go ahead, go right ahead.
Just one comment. I mean, if we were to approve it tonight, it still couldn't start until you got the approval from the Corps. Mr. Wilson, can you answer that so we don't have to reopen?
Absolutely. They still need to get all the other permits necessary, including VMRC and the Corps of Engineers.
So they still have to get the VMRC permit, the permit from the Corps. So if we don't decide tonight, they're not losing any time.
Sorry, if I may, I'm
not
going to
holding
respond to
up the
Mr.
project.
Apperson's question. The board cannot ask the applicants to delay. It's already been public notice, and you've had a hearing, so you must decide within 30 days. If they want to request a deferral, they can do that, but that's certainly not something that they are required to do. And I also feel that I have to advise the board that you do not have jurisdiction over the pier, the location of the pier, the length of the pier, the boathouse. That is not something that this board can consider when you are deciding whether or not to deny or grant a permit. And I understand that those were a lot of your concerns that you raised tonight. So I want you to be careful when you're discussing these projects, because Ms. Mabus is absolutely correct that a pier is a permitted use. They do not need authorization from this board. So I would encourage you to take that in consideration and base your decision solely on the impacts to the wetlands within your jurisdiction.
Thank you. We've closed the public hearing, but this needs everyone's opinion to have it done correctly. So I'm going to open the public hearing again, and you can speak. Please come forward.
Carla Haven. Mike, can you go to the site plan, please? So the 150-foot section is the shortest section along the wetlands. That's part of the reason why it was chosen. It's also part of the most open area on that property. And Mr. Apperson and Mr. O'Brien, I think, you did go to the site.
Oh, I went to the Uncle's Neck site,
Mr. Waltrip, you went then.
Around it.
Yeah, so perhaps you can confirm that that is the best position for the pier to be placed.
I just like to see it for myself. So that's why I'm making the request.
I can understand your request, Mr. Gussman, and I have one more problem with this, and that is the landowner, the person that has filed the permit didn't come here expecting to be put off for a month, and I don't like asking people, will you do this, when the applicant will agree to almost anything to get their permit. I feel like they're being almost taken advantage of by asking them that, especially if I cannot read this, we can make a motion, but I think the votes are here to pass this. I do not want to impede upon your opinions. I respect it very, very highly. At the same time, I look at this from what has been said here about really the only thing that we have to say about this legally is the fact of how it's going to be built there. And I saw this same thing happen down at York River State Park, where there was, and finally went to VIMS, and it was decided there to go ahead and build a pier. I'm at a quandary right now as to do something to have everybody have this work out right, but my suggestion is to have a motion to vote on this, and we either defer or approve or whatever, and just take it from there. I do not want to ask the applicant there, will you do this if we do such and such? And this is just a personal opinion of mine. Please, go ahead.
We can't make a motion to defer. If I, un-
It says
if I, un-
here, excuse me, go ahead.
Ms. Parman, we can't make a motion to defer. That request has to come from the applicant, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Item C here under item 4, motion to defer or deny or adopt. And I would like to get this off dead center by saying I'd like to call for a vote. I would like to make a motion that the Wetlands Board vote WJPA 21-0019 to adopt the application.
So we have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the permit for Wetlands Board case number WJPA 21-0019.
Mr. Apperson, may I ask for clarification, please? Earlier in the board discussion, you had mentioned something about Phragmites and invasive species.
Yeah, and I do not want to to carry this any longer, but if we can make this retroactive, I would like to have something built into these permits that the county staff be authorized to ensure the fact that no invasive species become established as a direct cause from any activity that's done for the permit process. Ms. Pierman can say it a lot better than I can, but I would just like to have it so that if any invasive species has become established based on what's being done there, that the contractor or the homeowner is required to remove the invasive species. That's the gist of what I'm trying to say. I'm sure Ms. Pierman can word it right.
So we have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the permit for Wetlands Board case number WJPA 21-0019 with the added condition that the property owner remove any invasive species established there caused by the construction of the pier.
You think that's fair with you, Carla? The invasive species thing, do you have any problem with that? I'm not talking about you and your profession, the rest of the consultants. So you're going to, because it's going to be it's going to be on all applications from now on from James City County. Okay, good. Thank you.
We'll do a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
No,
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
And the motion carries.
I would like to have it recorded in the minutes that this affirmative vote, in my opinion, has nothing whatsoever as an indication of a lack of judgment on Mr. Gussman's part. He voted as he felt, and I have total respect for his opinion. And I, at least, sir, it'll be in the minutes, sir.
that's it.
All right, moving on. Let's see who's next. Mr. Wilson, you're up again, sir? Yes, sir. HWJPA 21, Sycamore Landing.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. The next two cases before you have been or will be pulled from the agenda. And the application fee refunded to both applicants. The General Assembly extended all permits that were due to expire during the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, the language passed says that any permit renewal required pursuant to sections 28.2-1205 or 28.2-1306 of the Code of Virginia for a permit that was set to expire between March 1st, 2020 and July 1, 2021 shall retroactively be considered valid and in effect until January 1, 2022. Both JPA 21-0024 at 10,010, or yes, 10010 Sycamore Landing Road, and WJPA 21-0025 at 10006 Sycamore Landing Road fall into that category. And both permits have been extended by the General Assembly to January 1, 2022. I apologize for any confusion. I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding either of these cases.
Questions? I think you're okay, Mr. Wilson. No questions. Thank you, sir. According to my board guide, that concludes the wetlands portion of this meeting, and board considerations would be next. Do we have anything that you want to bring up? Anyone? Moving on to matters of special privilege. WJPA, Mr. Wilson's up again, 6413 Conservancy. Post-construction discussion.
Before you tonight is a pier case that was approved by this board in October of last year, 2020, for Mr. Mark and Maria Veleca at 6413 Conservancy. This is a post-construction update of that project. From the previous presentation, the project located in the Conservancy on College Creek project area. There was an existing pier coming through the tidal marsh out into College Creek, and then the proposal was for a new pier to be built from this point, tying into the uplands and coming straight out to approximately this area here, and then the old pier to be removed. From the site plan, the area in red is the existing pier that is to be removed, and then the yellow is the new pier that was built. From the previous presentation, some pre-construction photographs. We had conditions similar in that approval that we would do a pre-construction and a post-construction survey, and this is the post-construction part of that. Those are all pre-construction photographs detailing the marsh. From just last week, June 2nd, the pier that angled out here used to be right here. It's a little difficult to see. The vegetation's a lot smaller in the former pier footprint. I could not tell any impact to the marsh from pulling the existing pier out when we were out there last week. The old pier came out about here. Again, I could not see any visible indications of where that pier used to be. The new pier, tying into the uplands there and coming out this way, I saw no indications of the barge traversing through the marsh on either the left side as shown in this photograph or the right side shown in this photograph. And then from the drone flight that we did, from the drone flight we did, pre-construction in October 2020. This is only a minute long, I'll just let it play. And then post-construction, June of 2021. Water's Edge Construction did build this pier and take the old pier out. They did float a barge through the marsh. They only worked at high tides and only moved the barge during high tides. It was staff's opinion that there were no wetland impacts associated with the new pier and removing the old pier, and we have authorized the surety that was in place to be released. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have. Yes, sir.
That was very impressive. That's the first time we're seeing this, right?
Yes, this is new technology from county video department, and they were very cooperative in working with us to get the drone video. Mr. Winall is very pleased with this project. I'm very pleased with this project. As with any contractor, occasionally there are differences of opinion on how things progress, but Mr. Winall, in this case, I expressly told him I was very happy. I could not tell which side of the pier he came in on to build this.
I've always been amazed at how resilient our marshes are. I mean, we've had some cases where the marshes were really torn up and they
Indeed, we
recover
have.
quickly. But the drone footage is a terrific tool.
Absolutely.
That was a great idea. I commend the staff on
Unfortunately,
doing that.
Unfortunately, Mr. Gussman, I'm not sure it's going to work in the case we just heard because of the bald cypress trees. I'm not sure how comfortable our video department would be maneuvering a drone through the cypress swamp, but I could ask.
And don't disturb any eagles.
It just proves the contractors that's doing these piers and stuff, and the vegetation you see in these marshes, because I've lived around these marshes operate on high water, even if you have a barge, and the tide goes out, if it settles down, the tide comes back and you move on out. As long as you don't go in and plow the marsh up, the vegetation will come back. That's what people don't understand. You don't have to plow through it and tear up the marsh. You float it in on high water, do your business, and when the tide drops out, you just wait for it. And when the tide comes back, you move on out off the vegetation, and it will come back just like what you just saw right there. And that's the way that, and it was a good job.
Yeah, Mr. Winall did a very good job on this pier, and I commended him for that.
Like it's a PVC material, right?
Yeah, I think it's Trex decking. The piles themselves are marine
Wood,
grade treated,
yeah.
but the decking itself is Trex material.
Oh, Mr. Wilson, I'd just like to say that I'm impressed with the job, not the drone. Drones are cheap, and we even have one ourselves, but I'm saying that this is not an accident, that this is built like this, and it's been done with no damage, and a large part of that goes to the fact that you were there and supervising, and Mr. Long is there. This is not an accident that this happens like this. This is the way it's supposed to look. Congratulations, sir. Good job. Thank you.
All the congratulations needs to go to Mr. Winall. I'll pass it on.
I'll pass it on. When I see Danny, I'll tell him too, but I'm sure that you were there more than once.
I do have another board matter,
Yes, sir,
if you don't
please.
mind.
No, I don't mind at all.
I'd like to introduce a couple new people to the board. One's a county employee, Ms. Robin Benedict, and then Mr. Ben Nettleton from VMRC. Did I get that? I did get it right this time. Okay. He is taking over as our VMRC representative for Jeff Madden.
Welcome.
Welcome, yes. Let's see, I don't think we have any further business for the Wetlands Board. Do we have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Motion adjourned, we passed. We are adjourned, passed.
This needs to go in the official record. I'd like to call to order the June 9th meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Ms. Parman, may we have a roll call, please?
Mr. O'Brien?
Here.
Mr. Waltrip? Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Apperson?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay. First order of business is the approval of the minutes from the May 12th meeting. Any additions, deletions, corrections to the minutes? Minutes stand approved. Next order of business are the public hearings. The outline for tonight's public hearings will be a staff presentation followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. After everyone wishing to speak have done so, the public hearing will be closed and discussion among the board will start. Our first case is CBPA 21-0064, 101 Abigail Lane.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here represents CBPA-21-0064 at 101 Abigail Lane. Ms. Susan Maida has requested a referral of this application for exception to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance while a further site plan is finalized for the project. As this case has been public noticed at this time, staff recommends that the public hearing be opened and stay open until July 2021 meeting, at which time the case will be heard. If that is amenable to the board, we would wish to do so.
Any problems with that? Okay. At this time, I will open the public hearing on CBPA 21-0064. Is there anyone here tonight who would like to speak on this case? Okay. The public hearing will remain open until next month. Do we need to vote on a deferral, or is that automatic?
No, that's fine. You don't need a vote.
No further actions required? Okay, so we look forward to hearing this case next month.
Thank you.
All right, our next case, CBPA 21-0065, 111 Cove Road.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, Trevor Long, Watershed Planner for James City County. Mr. Joseph and Ms. Catherine Dvorak have applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a patio with steps on property located at 111 Cove Road within the Kings Point subdivision and the College Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 1967 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size of this property is 0.81 acres, of which 84% is located within the RPA. The applicant's proposing to construct a patio and steps toward the rear of the existing house, equaling approximately 200 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA. The applicant's intent is to construct a seating area with a fire pit for personal use. The board has heard applications from this address previously. CBPA-20-0097 appeared before the Chesapeake Bay Board for the construction of a carport. CBPA-19-0139 was granted an administrative approval for the construction of the house. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts to the RPA equals the plantings of 3 shrubs, or 1/2 planting unit. The applicants have verbally agreed to this amount of planting, and this is in addition to the previously approved mitigation requirements from the previous approved site plans. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a patio and steps. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a patio is considered accessory in nature. Furthermore, this is the 3rd exception request in the past 18 months and therefore should be heard by this board. Board may grant exceptions to sections 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code, to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor. Staff recommends approval of this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The submittal of a mitigation plan equaling 3 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. A surety of $250 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee these mitigation plantings. And that this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by June 9th, 2022, with written request for an extension to this exception be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 28th, 2022, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this approval. I'd like to now divert your attention to the screen for a brief presentation. Again, Mr. Joseph and Ms. Catherine Dvorak have applied for an exception request at 111 Cove Road to construct a patio and steps adjacent to their house. The vicinity map above showing the subject parcel here in blue within the Fords Colony subdivision, the Powhatan Creek watershed outlined here in purple. Aerial photograph of the site, I misspoke earlier as well. This is not within the Fords Colony subdivision nor the Powhatan Creek watershed. It's in 111 Cove Road in the Kings Point subdivision, pardon me. Aerial photograph of the site showing the property outlined here in blue and the water adjacent to the property. Since this photo was taken, there is a house and a carport constructed on the site. Topography of the site indicating a fairly flat buildable area with a steep slope going down towards the water, towards the rear of the property. And the RPA as affects this property outlined here in green. Project location pointed to here. And the site plan as it has been submitted to the county. With the 100-foot resource protection area outlined here in the red dashed line. The proposed patio highlighted here in yellow, and the 50-foot resource protection area dashed line in red. Again, this is the proposed residence that was administratively approved and the carport that gained approval from this board earlier. Some site photographs. The area to be constructed is currently encompassed by chipped mulch. Area generally following the path of the stones leading out to the fire pit. Looking back towards the area with the fire pit. And a photo looking towards the resource. The water is beyond these trees in the vegetated buffer. Again, staff does recommend approval of this exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required as need be. That a mitigation plan consisting of 3 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. That a surety of $250 be submitted to the county as well to guarantee the plantings. And that this exception request approval will become null and void if construction is not begun by June 9th, 2022, with written requests for an extension submitted no later than April 28th, 2022, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this approval. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions for staff? Okay, no questions. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak on this issue? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Yep. Joe Dvorak, 111 Cove Road, property owner, board, staff, thanks for considering this project. I don't have anything to add to the staff work, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Dvorak? Nope. Thank you
All right.
very much
All
for
right,
coming
thanks.
out tonight. Anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board? It looks pretty straightforward. Can I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the Wetlands Board adopt case CBPA 21-0665 Cove Road for patio.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 21-0065. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson? Motion carries.
Okay, motion carries. You have your permit, or technically your exception. Our next case is CBPA 21-0073, 205 St. Cuthbert.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here represents CBPA 21-0073. Ms. Autumn Hauser of Williams Landscaping Incorporated has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. James Mullins for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a patio and walkway on property located at 205 St. Cuthbert within the Fords Colony subdivision and the Powhatan Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 1998 prior to the 2004 ordinance revisions that affected this property. Total lot size of this property is 0.32 acres, of which 68% is located within the RPA. The applicant has proposed the construction of a 698 square foot patio adjacent to the constructed dwelling with a 160 square foot walkway area and a 280 square foot gravel seating area. Additionally, the applicant has proposed 30 square feet of a river rock swale within the resource protection area. Total impacts to the resource protection area equate to 1,163 square feet. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 3 planting units, equaling 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 9 shrubs. The applicant has proposed a mitigation plan equaling 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 34 shrubs, therefore exceeding county mitigation requirements. There is an existing 20-foot James City Service Authority sanitary sewer easement immediately adjacent to the lake, which cannot have any mitigation trees planted within it. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a patio and walkway. The application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the patio is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to Section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code, to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable, appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be moderate. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, including a building permit. A surety of $2,000 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings, equating to 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 34 shrubs. And this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by June 9th, 2022, with written requests for an extension to this exception be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 28th, 2022, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. For a brief presentation, again, Mr. James Mullins, living at 205 St. Cuthbert, has applied for the construction of a patio and walkway. The vicinity map above highlighting the property in blue, this time in Forest Colony and within the Powhatan Creek watershed, outlined here in purple. Aerial photography of the site. Currently, there is a house under construction on this site. It did gain administrative approval from staff earlier this year. The topography of the site, sloping down gradually towards the edge of the water, just beyond the property line. The resource protection area as it affects this lot, highlighted here in green. And the site plan as it has been submitted to county staff, with the 50-foot resource protection division outlined here in red, and the 100-foot resource protection division down near the bottom of the site plan. The yellow portion shows the impervious impacts to the RPA as they have been proposed. Again, the patio, a walkway, and steps leading down to a seating area. There is also a river rock swale that runs adjacent to this house. Some photos from the site looking closer towards the patio area to be constructed within the 50-foot seaward RPA. Again, the lake adjacent to this property can be seen just beyond the tree line. Looking back towards the side of the house, there will be a walkway and a patio in this area. This is the house that is currently under construction on this property, with a walkway coming downwards towards the proposed patio area and seating area beyond it, and a shot showing where the proposed patio will be located. And staff does recommend approval of this application and exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required, that a surety of $2,000 be submitted to the county to guarantee the mitigation plantings, and this exception request become null and void if construction has not begun by June 9th, 2022, with written request for an extension submitted no later than April 28th, 2022, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this exception request. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have at this time. Yes, sir.
I just have a few. Wait, what you referred to as the lake is actually a BMP, right?
Yes, sir. It is constructed as a BMP and commonly seen as a lake.
Okay. Even though all the residents call it the lake, it's really a BMP in
Yes,
our
sir.
eyes. Okay,
It's one of a series of BMPs within that subdivision.
okay. And the walkway itself, that's not pavers, right? That's going to be, did you say gravel or,
So there are two walkways associated with the site plan. There's one that comes around the side of this house. It is my understanding that those will be pavers. However, the walkway extending down towards the fire pit and seating area, I believe it actually is just a seating area, that will be gravel.
okay, all right. Any other questions from the board?
Were all the permits gotten for the clearing on the outside of the silt fence and everything?
Yes, sir. Those were granted as well.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Trevor.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak on this?
Hello, I'm Jim Mullins, the owner of the property, and I'm very excited about this project. It's going to allow us to have, or allow me to have a wonderful home looking out onto a beautiful piece of property, beautiful watershed. I do want to make sure that it's clear that that orange fence is at the 50-foot water RPA line, and that the patio and the fire pit will all be within the 100-foot. It's not within the 50-foot. Only the stone walkway and the sitting area down near the pond is within the 50-foot. And I turn it over now to my landscaper.
Thank you. I'm Aaron Williams with Williams Landscape and Design, and I can answer any questions you guys might have for me.
Any questions for Mr. Williams? No, looks like it's laid out very nicely.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this case? At this time, I will close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Silt fence is working good.
Yeah. That's right. It sure is. Can we have a motion?
Make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 21-0073 at 205 St. Cuthbert.
Parman, can we have a vote?
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip? Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
And the motion carries.
Hey, you have your exception. Good luck with the property. Our next case is CBPA 21-0072, 1909 North Fowler's Close.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mike Wilson here, Section Chief, Resource Protection, here to present case CBPA 21-0072 with Kristen Elder, 1909 North Fowler's Close, for the construction of a pool and a patio within the RPA. Ms. Autumn Hauser of Williams Landscape and Design has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Ms. Kristen Elder for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a pool and patio on property located at 1909 North Fowler's Close within the Governor's Land subdivision in the Gordon Creek watershed. Property is further identified as James City County parcel, tax map parcel number 43204000015. Parcel was platted in 1992 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size for this property is 0.87 acres, of which approximately 32% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing to construct a pool and a patio equaling approximately 1,146 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA. The required mitigation for this amount of impervious cover impacts to the RPA equals the planting of 3 units, which is 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 9 shrubs. The applicant has verbally agreed to this amount of planting. Staff evaluated the application and the exception request for the construction of the pool and patio. The application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 2311 and 2314 and should be heard before this board because the construction of the pool and patio are considered accessory structures. The board may grant exceptions to 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief, that granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity, that the exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and it is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances, either permitted or non-conforming, that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's reviewed this application and the exception request and has determined that the impacts associated with the proposal to be moderate for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval of the exception request, and if the board wishes to approve, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into that approval. That the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, including a building permit, an erosion sediment control plan, and a land disturbing permit if necessary. That a surety of $2,000 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings of 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 9 shrubs, or substitutions approved by staff thereof. That the exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by June 9th, 2022, and that written request for an extension shall be submitted to our office no later than April 28th, 2022, 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. Direct your attention to the screen. The application is for a pool and a patio at 1909 North Fowler's Close within the Governor's Land subdivision located here outlined in blue, and it is also within the Gordon Creek watershed. From an aerial photograph of the property, existing house and lawn, topography of the property gently slopes from right to left or east to west, and then from south to north from the road down into the wetland system. The RPA as it affects this property, it does come up into the lawn area of the property, but does not impact the existing house. From the site plan that was submitted, the pool and patio are located here, and the red line, as shown, is the 100-foot RPA buffer line, and you can see a little bit of the pool here, about half of the pool, and then surrounding patio outlined in yellow would be what the request is for. A couple of photographs of the site. From the east looking west across the back of the property, house is off to the left. Pool location is in this area. From the back of the house looking towards the wetland system and the RPA features, you will notice in this photograph there is a wrought iron or an aluminized fence, black fence. In this location, the entire project will be within the fenced area of the backyard. Again, that fence does show here to the left, within the, slightly within the tree line. The impacts to the RPA are in this area, which is existing lawn. And then from the edge of the property, or edge of the tree line, I'm sorry, looking back towards the house, again, the patio and pool are in this location. Again, the impacts to the RPA are to existing lawn. And from approximately the middle of the patio and pool area looking further west, again, you can see the fence here. That fence shows up here on the location map. Again, staff does recommend approval with these following conditions: that any other necessary local, federal, state permits are required, including land disturbing permit, and submission of an erosion sediment control plan, and potentially a land disturbing permit if impacts exceed 2,500 square feet of disturbance. that a surety of $2,000 be submitted to guarantee the planting mitigation, that the exception request be null and void and construction is not begun within 1 year of tonight, June 9th, 2022, and that any exception request be submitted to our office no later than April 28th, 2022. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding this application.
Any questions for?
All in the yard, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Hello again, my name's Aaron Williams, Williams Landscape and Design. And one thing to point out, I apologize, Mike, I didn't turn in the revised drawing, but we did, I know you guys won't be able to see this clearly, but we did mitigate in that turf area, so no more turf, it'll all be gone. And I think it's 24 shrubs, 4 trees is what we put in place of that. So I can turn this in for Mike to review.
Would any of the board members like to look at that closer? Okay, just turn it in. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Williams? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this case? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
A good project.
Looks good. I'm glad to see they pulled it back to the house. There have been some other pools that they have them really far away from the house, but this one is up nice and tight and looks like a good job. And the mitigation plan looks very nice, so I don't have any problems with it. Okay, would someone like to make a motion?
All right, I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution to grant exception for Chesapeake Bay case CBPA 21-0072 at 1909 North Fowler's Close.
Parman, could we have the roll call?
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip? Mr. Gussman?
Yes,
Mr. Apperson? Motion carries.
it passes. Thanks for coming out tonight. Our final public hearing is going to be CBPA 21-0067, 1796 Cypress Isle.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA-21-0067, 1796 Cypress Isle. Ms. Autumn Hauser, Williams Landscaping Design, has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Ms. Brenda Snow for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a landing on property located at 1796 Cypress Isle within the Governor's Land subdivision and the James River watershed. The parcel was platted in 2001 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size of this property is 1.22 acres, of which 48% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing to construct a landing at the edge of an existing path equaling approximately 500 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA. The applicant's intent is to construct a seating area near the water adjacent to an existing path to allow the homeowner's parents a level and stable place to sit and enjoy the outdoors and water. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts to the RPA equals the plantings of 1 planting unit, 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. The applicants have submitted a mitigation plan exceeding the required mitigation plantings. Staff has evaluated the application exception request for the construction of a landing. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a landing is considered accessory in nature and because the proposal construction will impact the seaward 50-foot RPA. Board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code, to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval of this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for this project, including a building permit if necessary. A surety of $1,000 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings. That this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by June 9th, 2022, with a written request for an extension to this exception be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 28th, 2022, just 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this approval. For a brief presentation, again, Ms. Brenda Snow has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception to construct a landing on property located at 1796 Cypress Isle, outlined here in blue, along the James River and within the Governor's Land subdivision. Aerial photography of the site. There's a series of breakwaters here, an existing pathway that was previously approved with the proposed constructed landing adjacent and right outside of it. Topography of the site is a fairly flat site with some gradual slope coming down towards the James River and the breakwater system and incumbent beaches. The floodplain as it does affect this site. And the resource protection area outlined in orange above, showing the constructed landing being pointed to here. The site plan as it has been submitted to county staff with the resource protection area outlined here in red. The proposed landing outlined here and highlighted in yellow. And the existing impervious path that is to be filled in with pavers that is currently gravel. Also to be noted that that is considered impervious already. And the proposed mitigation that exceeds county requirements here in green. Some site photographs of the area of the proposed construction. Again, this series of breakwaters and beach towards the back. The existing gravel patio, walkway with a patio or landing in this area. And staff does recommend approval of this exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required. That a surety of $1,000 to guarantee the mitigation plantings be submitted. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by June 9th, 2022, with written request for an extension submitted no later than April 28th, 2022. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak on this issue?
Aaron Williams, Williams Landscape and Design. Just to note, the pathway is permeable pavers is what we're proposing, and the landing using permeable pavers with the, correct drainage and everything. That's the only thing I wanted to comment. Any questions you guys have for me?
Questions for Mr. Williams?
Pavers ever impervious?
Yes, if you install pavers with polymeric sand in the joints and tight fitting, they can be impervious. Yeah.
Significant sheet flow coming off if they're
You
tight
could use the
enough.
polymeric sand.
Right.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Williams? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board? Would someone like to make a motion?
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the board adopt CBA 210067 Cypress Landing application.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt a resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board KCBPA 21-0067 at Cypress Isle. Can we have a roll call?
Mr.
vote.
O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip? Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson? And the motion carries.
Okay, that concludes our public hearings tonight. Under board considerations, I notice we have, the only item is that we do have a meeting scheduled for July 14th. Mr. Wilson, any idea how many cases we're going to have that night?
I don't have that number on me tonight, but we will also have a Wetlands Board meeting that night as well.
Okay. Are there any other matters of board consideration? Moving on to matters of special privilege. I have a couple comments I'd like to make before we run away. Ms. Parman, I'm a little bit confused about what our remote participation policy is. I know tonight we were told we could not participate remotely. Is there a chance that you could either write us a brief explanation of how that policy works, or if it'd be easier, just address it the next board meeting and explain to us how the remote policy works?
Certainly, I can provide you, a brief on that via email, and I can make a couple comments right now. The General Assembly and the governor are very lenient with political subdivisions in terms of giving us, the ability to allow remote participation during the state of emergency, and that will likely end in the coming few weeks. The Freedom of Information Act governs your meetings, and it does allow for remote participation in some instances where a board member cannot travel because of a disability or a health condition. And it does allow for remote participation by a board member for a personal reason, and that's limited to only twice a year. So in limited circumstances, yes, we can allow for that. The request has to go to the board chair, and it has to be approved by the board members who are present. This board does have alternates, which is different from our other boards in the county, so I would encourage the use of alternates before we get to a point where we're having, remote participation frequently. I had the board adopt that policy so that during the pandemic, we could still be lenient in terms of allowing members to participate from their home.
Okay, so, because I remember we voted and we adopted a
You did,
policy,
yes.
and I was sort of confused how,
Yeah,
so the governor's proclamation overrode our policy.
it did, yes.
Okay, and that expires now. Okay, well, you've answered all my questions. I don't need a memo or another presentation.
Okay, well,
Thank you
certainly
very
let me know
much.
if you do.
That was very clear. Two other quick comments. This is my first board meeting where I've participated. I've participated remotely for, I think, the last 6 or 7 board meetings, and I would like to publicly thank our technical advisor. I believe it's Mr. Anderson. So I would like to commend him on helping me participate remotely. He was very, very patient and tremendous help. I would never have been able to participate remotely without his help. So I'd like to make that, and any other board member that's participated remotely is aware of how helpful he's been. And a second comment I'd like to make is at the last meeting, I wasn't here in person. I participated remotely, and I want to commend Mr. Long for doing an excellent job in handling that meeting. I know that was the first time you took the whole meeting on by yourself, and I thought you did a great job. I just want to commend you on that. Okay. Anything else under matters of special privilege? Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion adjourned, sir.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Aye. We're adjourned.